We are determined to try to get this right. Alrighty, I think I maybe. Let's see. All right, Pamela, I see you. I'm adding. I think we may have it now. It says I'm adding. Okay, it says I'm adding you, so you should. Yay! Oh my
Yay!
goodness. This is an example of not giving up. Oh my goodness.
Yay. Okay, now let's see. I'm trying to get this so that I can have this whole thing horizontal and still speak to you. It doesn't really matter, but it would be nice to not see you sideways.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for your patience. This was
Sure, sure.
definitely,
Yeah.
oh,
No, that's okay.
this was
It's
a little,
just slipped. Just slipped. Okay, it's a little bit precarious positioning. We'll see whether it stays there.
oh my goodness. Well, I am so glad that we have finally connected. Speaking of trauma, it was getting a little traumatic. Oh my goodness. But we persevered. So we are here and we're going to jump right into it. Hopefully those, I know there were several people that were joining. Hopefully they will be able to join, but if not, they can check it on the playback.
Okay.
So
So, well, it's
so
nice to
let's
see you. It's nice to see you. It is.
yes, it is very nice to see you. And as we kind of get ourselves back together, right? We're talking about a very important topic. So
Absolutely.
yeah, kind of interesting that we had a little bit of stress there, a little bit of anxiety, but we're talking about trauma. And
Right.
so as we get into it, so first of all, for those that are watching, whether live or on the playback, a little bit about me. I'm Lita Harlem, and I'm doing this through my Natural Me brand, which is basically a brand to help empower specifically women. But we do various workshops and events and things like that to basically help the community to feel empowered. And this month is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I've been doing a series of videos on my Instagram page, but this is the first one on Facebook. But I really wanted to capture this topic of trauma and kind of sit with an expert to talk about this. So I have invited Pamela Pine to join me. So, Pamela, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your background with mental health.
Sure. Well, let's see. It's a long story, so I'm going to try to keep it as really, really short. And basically, by background and training, I'm an international public health and public health communication specialist.
Yeah.
20 years ago, I started learning about child sexual abuse, and it happened as a fluke. I got something across my desk at the organization where I was working at the time from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, our CDC. And it was called for, it was a request for proposals on research on various types of interpersonal violence. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so I started reading about the area of child sexual abuse primarily because I knew two people, only two people, but they were close to me who were working in that specific field. The
Yeah.
more I learned, the more horrified I got. The numbers were overwhelming. The
Wow.
outcomes were incredible. And I realized, even though I had a long background, even at that point, in public health and public health communication, I knew nothing. I knew nothing about the numbers it affected, the outcomes, anything. And I started asking my colleagues whether they had a background or knowledge, and they did not either.
Yeah.
So I started wondering, how do we get out of public health school without any knowledge of child trauma or other types of really any concrete understanding of interpersonal violence or trauma? Uh,
Yeah.
and the fact is that we do. And even people who are coming out of social work school often really don't have the fundamentals. So I got all wrapped up. I mean, really wrapped up. And the way
Yeah.
I explain this is that I think the issue took me rather than me taking the issue. It was
Yeah.
just I I couldn't let go
Yeah.
because of the amount of the amount of abuse and trauma and the impact and outcomes that it was causing.
Yeah.
So, I went full steam ahead. What can I say? And we've done a whole lot of work in 20 years. And
Wow.
we've developed a model focused on child sexual abuse and other adverse childhood experiences
Mm-hmm.
and focusing on what those are, the outcomes of them, and how to prevent, treat, and mitigate. So that's a
Wow.
very quick overview of what it's been. And we're now working internationally. We did a major program in Cyprus. We've worked in a number of places in the United States, across Europe, New Zealand. We've got a proposal in to expand the program to Samoa and South Africa. And next week, another proposal will go in for two more countries. We've got a 15 member, 15 organizations located in 18 countries around the world that we're
Wow.
looking for the funds for, and that's where we are. And the focus of the model is on advocacy, education, training, and
Wow.
policy development and reform.
Wow.
So
Well, you're doing
yeah,
amazing things. That's really amazing. And I know that it's kind of hard to put into words, all the work that you've done, like you said, over the past 20 years, with dealing specifically with just the childhood trauma, but really just helping people in the community to deal with traumatic
absolutely.
events. Yeah.
Right.
So kudos to you, and
Well,
thank
thank
you
you.
for joining again the
Oh,
patient.
absolutely, absolutely. I was really looking forward to this. I mean, if you want to pose those questions that we discussed, that would be great just to keep them in front of mind because I'm now got a computer open and a phone open. So I don't have it up on my computer, although I can bring it up. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the issue of trauma, particularly now, is
Yeah.
so critical. And frankly, also, and something that I just want to mention, and I can go into later if you want, but our society in particular, and particularly certain um, uh, uh, community niches
Mm-hmm.
are are really separated. I mean, if you have an extended family, that's one
Yeah.
thing, and you're living together. But
Yeah.
if you don't have that, and as I say, certain communities are really closed off.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not really true about necessarily how the rest of the world or much of the world works, but um, a lot of the U.S. is just very, very disintegrated, and we don't
Mm.
have those everyday connections unless we're going to work or going to
Yeah.
here or going there. And so people really have become very many people have become very isolated from each other, and
Yeah.
it has created a lot more stress and a lot more trauma. I mean, what you see
Yeah.
now, what you see now is the public health agencies like CDC and DHHS talking about the amount of increase in mental health issues. It's going through the
Yeah.
roof.
Yeah, yeah. So let's back up a little bit because trauma is a word. It's kind of like depression, in my opinion. You know,
Mhm.
depression is like it's thrown out there so much, so many times. It's a very common word. And I think while that's good because it can bring attention to it, I also feel like at times it can almost water it down and it just becomes a common word. So if to in a I guess as simple as it can be made to define or describe what does trauma mean, people who have suffered from trauma, what does that really mean?
Yeah,
So you'll hear that all.
you know what I did in prep for this call, and I'm going to go ahead and pick this and open something on my computer because I what I wanted to do is give you both kind of the technical and clinical information, and then let's talk about it and pull it apart. But
Okay.
there's an article. It's a little older, but a lot of this information hasn't changed. It's not old. I mean, it's within the last decade. But there's the body of literature on trauma at this point is huge. But this is from an article called Post Traumatic Stress Disorder: The Neurobiological Impact of Psychological Trauma. And I'm just going to read just
Mhm.
a eensy weensy bit of it. There's a lot of like
Okay.
technical jargon, but then as I say, let's tease it apart, but let's start from the clinical base. Why not,
Sounds good. Sounds good.
So, um, what this article talks about is a basic model of PTSD neurobiology, but we're not only talking here PTSD, it's various types of trauma that this is relevant to. So
Okay.
this is what this says. As I say, it's a fair amount of technical gobbledygook, but we'll pull it apart. So the bio
Okay.
it's an article by Sharon and Nemiroff. It's from 2011. And it says the biological perturbations observed in patients suffering from PTSD are numerous and likely reflect an enduring dysregulation of multiple stress mediating systems that occur as a result of psychological shock. These
Hmm.
physiological perturbations presumably occur in patients with genetic, epigenetic, and experiential predispositions when exposed to certain extreme conditions. Presumably, these changes signify an indelible sensory imprint of a maladaptively processed experience that co-opts as imbalanced degree of emotional importance and thereafter releases or restrains behavioral reactions that focus on defending against future trauma via activation or deactivation in a losing effort to secure homeostasis. What happens, in other words, is that because of either our genetic makeup
Hmm.
or because of what we've been exposed to, childhood trauma, sexual violence, other types of violence, there's all kinds of trauma, war. What happens in our brains is that it sets off this fight flight response,
Hmm.
and all these various types of hormones are released. And it has to do with
Yeah.
cortisol, which can affect your heart as well as your brain, serotonin, which tends to increase your spirits or your mood. And all of those things kind of start going haywire. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what we have to try to figure out how to do is get them back to a regulated response so that when we're exposed to other things that may remind us of the original experience but are not
Hmm.
as severe or not severe, we don't go crazy with regard to our response to that new experience.
Got it. Okay.
Uh,
Wow. Wow. So what I'm taking away from that is how we go through all these various experiences, right? And they're never just simply kind of isolated. They kind of build this pattern and eventually we start to have certain reactions that may not be all that positive as a result of just these experiences that we go through, and what our body automatically does as a response to those experiences.
Yeah, and we all have them. We all have them in some way, shape, or form, to lesser extent, to greater extent. But I mean, I'll draw on personal experience. Let's see, when I was a little kid, I had a pretty cushy, background. I did, but everybody has their stuff. And
Yeah.
if you have an experience, as I did with one of the members of my family, for example, that felt pretty traumatic, you
Hmm.
set up, consciously or unconsciously, you'll start reacting to later situations, in a manner that that recalls the trauma of the past. Even things
Yeah.
things simply, something simple like when I was like 4 years old, I was
Mm.
playing in a brook in my backyard, and I fell. My foot went through the ice. My foot through big
Mm.
little kid playing in the brook, right? But
Yeah.
frankly, my sister made a huge deal out of it and said that my
Mm.
parents were going to be tremendously angry at me, and I was really going to be in a lot of trouble. And I remember that experience as I was absolutely
Wow.
panicked. And so I was a
Wow.
little girl. So, those kinds of things, when you're facing another experience where you think somebody might be really upset with you, you go right back there to that panic
Wow.
response, even if it's not a big thing, right? Necessarily.
Yeah.
And the bigger the issue, a rape, child sexual abuse, other types of child abuse, other types of trauma, your
Hmm.
fight flight response kicks in to situations.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And I'm actually really glad that you shared that experience, because two reasons. Sometimes people tend to measure their own traumatic experience against maybe someone else's, who they would think that's worse than theirs, right? So what happens, and I've seen this a lot of times in different people that I've worked with domestic violence victims especially, you almost start to downplay your own stuff, and then
Hmm.
that you don't get the help that you need, because
Right.
you're like, well, it wasn't that bad, or
Right.
it wasn't as bad as this person. So I
Right.
love you brought that experience out, because it's not as much about the incident as much as it is, from what it sounds like you're saying, about how you process that incident. Of
Exactly.
course, there are some incidents that in themselves are just very bad, but a lot of trauma can come from the things that are around the things that we go through, the people, the way people handle it, how they make us feel about it. So I love that you brought that out. And I think it also, not only does it help the people who are experiencing symptoms from things they went through, that maybe they were comparing themselves with other people, but it also helps those who, from the other side, sometimes we can be a little judgmental. Sometimes we can say, well, you didn't have it as bad as me, or
Right.
what's wrong, or why are you depressed, everything is
Right.
great in your life. So
Right.
I love that you brought that out, because it definitely helps put it in perspective.
Yeah. And jumping from that thought, Lita, is the fact that, experience or life is the great equalizer, right? I mean, really, when you've lived a while, when you've lived through a lot of different things,
Yeah.
and and we start realizing, perhaps, hopefully, if we're lucky, that, um, what we see on the surface, or what we hear, and as you say, we process and judge, We are
Hmm.
such complex beings. We're so complex. And
Yeah.
how we understand ourselves and other people and how we might come across to others, um, really, if we're if we're careful and truthful, what we want to do is recognize that something has happened to
Hmm.
a person in their life, whether we fully understand it or not. If they're frozen, can you hear me? Oh, there. Okay. So,
There we go.
that's not to say that we accept everything from everybody, but it is to
Right.
say that kindness and understanding, in fact, really does go a very, very long way to our connectivity between people,
Yeah.
between ourselves and other people. We're social beings. We are not meant to be all alone.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do. So we talked about this before. There's a part that I want to touch on regarding trauma and processing and dealing with. So there's been a lot of traumatic things in the news. There's been a lot of really hard things for people to deal with,
Absolutely.
especially to particular communities.
Right.
And like I said, I don't want to go too deep in that because I know that's just going to stir a lot of different emotions and conversation. But I do want to talk about, what are some good tips that we can do when we're facing these traumatic events, that we're hearing in the news, and when we see things that really even trigger in ourselves,
Hmm.
feeling of injustice or unfairness. What would you recommend from your experience and expertise, how we can kind of cope effectively with that?
Yeah, and some of it, some of it is um, is out there for people to kind of grab onto. Some of it is really not rocket science, although that doesn't necessarily make it easy to practice. But
Right.
given the distance, given the isolation, given if somebody's already a trauma survivor, but whether they
Mhm.
are or not, and now they're isolated, whether they're a trauma survivor or not, there are basic things that we can all try to do. And after I just say a few words, I'll also direct people to a site where they can pull up some of these ideas online and maybe follow them. But
Perfect.
yeah, but things like calling up a friend, a family member. If you can do it, with video, all the better. Just to talk. If you're
Yeah.
comfortable speaking to somebody, if there's somebody that you're comfortable speaking to, getting a hold
Hmm.
of them on, visually and or through voice, and
Yeah.
telling them that you're feeling uncomfortable and you're really struggling at the time and feeling lonely. That will help as long as you really believe that they're going to be able to listen to you non-judgmentally. But the thing,
Okay.
and that's really important. And you brought that word out, and it's such an important issue. The judgment that we have for everybody. We all have those thoughts that go on in our heads. Well, I'm better than them, or who does she think she is, and all that kind of stuff. But who if we can reach out to somebody who we trust and believe will listen,
Yeah.
that's one thing that certainly we can do, particularly during these times. And
Yeah.
then there's the mindfulness stuff that's so out there at this point, but not everybody does it, and not everybody maybe knows how to do it. But it's pretty simple. If you can find, even through just minutes of your day, a place to go off by yourself and
Hmm.
really do that kind of deep breathing, just to center yourself, to calm
Yeah.
yourself. The breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth, and deep, breaths. You can leave your eyes
Wow.
open, you can close your eyes. And then, of course, there's the other basics. As good a food as you can to eat, high in nutritional value, protein, green leafy vegetables. I mean, all of those things feed the brain and help our nervous systems function and cope.
Yeah.
Exercise is so important. Even if you can't do anything else, go for a really long walk and as fast as you can. But even if you can't go fast or long, start someplace. Start with 10 minutes
Yeah.
a day, you know?
Yeah.
Those are
Yeah.
some of the basics that we all know, but we don't all do. Yeah,
Yeah. And it's so true because a lot of times when you're experiencing the symptoms of trauma, those are the exact things you don't want to do. But I love that you're bringing that out. Like you said, even though it may seem simple and it may seem like something that we should do and we should know, it's good to hear those reminders. And I can even speak personally with the exercise portion. When I started backup therapy a couple of months ago, that was one of the first things that my therapist recommended. Just do something, move, because
hmm,
again, with depression, a lot of times you don't want to move.
right,
And I will tell you, it makes a huge
right.
difference. Like it's almost unbelievable how much better you can feel when you actually get out there and just, and I'm not walking super fast, I'm not running, like I'm literally just moving, walking, maybe even dancing at home. And it definitely makes a difference.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
love that you brought that out. Yeah.
If you have access to a simple yoga book, and just
Hmm.
there's a really great kind of morning stretch. It's what is it? To the sun. It's sun salutation. I think that's what it's called. It
Okay.
it'll take you, if you do it 3 times, maybe it'll take you 10, 15 minutes, maybe not even that. But it's a
Yeah.
deep stretch, it's the arms over the head, it's the bending down, it's the
Mhm.
moving into something that's called in yoga plank position. So you end up getting all of your body just stretched out really easily. And
Yeah.
I think most people could find 15 minutes a day just to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, the key is really just trying your best to do those basic things. Because the reality is we are all dealing with just some really rough times right now. And like you said, many, many, many people suffer from some type of post-traumatic symptoms of things they went through, whether as a child, young adult, whatever the case. So these things that we're seeing, and we're constantly surrounded by death, we're constantly hearing bad news, and then on top of that we're isolated.
Right.
We're not able to get to our loved ones. I was saying to someone, I miss hugging my mom. Like I've done the
Sure.
drive by and we wave from the porch, but it's nothing like really that human interaction. And I'm a person that really, really needs that anyway. So you mentioned, as one of the tips that people should try to connect with each other, even if it's just virtually, the
Right.
benefit that they do.
Yeah.
So what else what may be some other things, if they tried those things and maybe they're still just really having a hard time right now, especially, what are some other things that you might recommend that someone can do?
I think also a thing that friends and I we didn't come up with, and we haven't actually done it yet, but a lot of people have been doing this, and it has to do with the connection, is even though we can't get together in groups, if you've got a computer with Skype or Zoom or WhatsApp, get a bunch of your friends together and have a glass of wine, you
Yeah.
know. Um,
Yeah.
as long as that's safe and healthy for you. But that's something that you can do as well. A couple of other things. Wait a minute, I wrote a couple other things down. One second, Lita. I'm just gonna scroll down here. Let's see.
Okay.
Oh yeah, this is kind of an important one that I didn't mention right now, particularly now, is to take breaks from watching, reading, and listening to the or listening or reading the newspapers. Because
Yeah.
I woke up last night, Lita, and I hadn't listened to the news yesterday because I was just really busy, and I turned on what was going on in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, if you're listening to that kind of stuff all day long,
Yeah.
it's really, really easy to paint a picture of us as completely out of control. And
Yeah.
parts of our society are, after all. I mean, that is real. But maybe take a
Yeah.
break from that. Take a break from it sometimes and get away from it. And go, instead of doing that, go out for that walk, you know?
Yeah. I think what you're
Um,
saying is so key with that because I agree with you. You're inundated with it, and especially if it hits on parts of things that you may have already dealt with, trauma you've already experienced, feelings, like I said, of being treated unfairly or injustice, and then you're constantly watching things. It's feeding it. It can only bring about. It really is not healthy at a certain point, and I know many times we feel like we should watch and we should be engaged, but we have to protect our own mental health. We
mhm.
really, I really believe strongly in that as well. We have to put some boundaries and some limits around how much that we're taking in because it's not going to do anyone any good.
Right, right. Just to mention, because it deserves mention, that the Black male experience in this country, I mean, to grow up with that recognition of what can happen to you and often does, and you're exposed to that constantly. um, the anger, depression, that must necessarily almost come along with that is huge.
Yeah.
And I certainly wouldn't be so forward or presumptuous to uh, really provide any possible guidance on how to cope with that. But certainly that's something that Black men in the United States. I mean, that's something perhaps to look into, because I'm sure that there are a number of people who have some guidance about that and how to cope with it.
Yeah.
Better cope with it perhaps. But
Yeah.
that's something to look at. But generally speaking, also, oh, the sleep, wind down your day. Don't go to sleep all keyed up. Make sure that you have some time, if you can,
Yeah.
before you get into bed at night, so that your mind has had some time to rest.
Yeah.
Lay off the alcohol and drugs,
Yeah.
because that is also not helpful in terms of keeping you calm. I mean, alcohol is a depressant, as we know,
Yeah.
um, and that is often not very helpful. I'm not saying not a glass of wine or a beer, but I'm just saying, careful with the drugs and the alcohol.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, making time to unwind, trying to do some other activities that you enjoy besides,
Yeah.
yeah, the things that are stressing you out.
Yeah. And Pamela, I have to really say thank you for mentioning, what you did regarding the Black male experience. Because, I just respect that you did acknowledge that. And even as a Black female, I've found it difficult. I share some experience, obviously being, Black, but I found even for myself that I've been very hands off with talking to a lot of my male friends, my Black male friends, because they're experiencing something that I just won't ever experience. I will never be a Black male in this society and know what that feels like, to know that there are certain people who target Black males, and that's just like you said, the anxiety and the anger and the depression. That's just something that I won't ever have that experience. So I appreciate you bringing that to, bringing that up. And again, the encouragement for our Black males to, there are resources out there, there are groups and support systems for people who do share their experience. And it can be very difficult for men in general to talk, especially men who have been victims of certain things from society. It can be difficult to talk about that. But to your point, these same healthy coping skills can benefit anyone, regardless of what your trauma is. So I appreciate that you brought that up, and I hope that that's a good takeaway for our Black men, especially.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I can't even imagine. I mean, my Black friends, talk about the talk that I guess every young Black man in the United States gets at some point, about how to protect yourself against society.
yeah,
I mean, it's horrifying, and it's just tremendously sad. And
yeah,
besides taking care of themselves, obviously, it is a societal issue that needs
yeah,
to be that needs to be addressed. It just has to be, because this is just,
yeah,
it's horrible. It's not right or fair. And we as individuals and as a society have got to come together and do something about this issue. But
yeah,
anyway, yeah, but on the general topics, again, those are, pretty much the things that I made note of: taking breaks from watching, reading, or listening to news stories, taking care
yeah,
of your body, deep breaths, stretching, eating healthy, well-balanced meals, exercising regularly, getting plenty of sleep, avoiding alcohol and drugs, making time to unwind, connecting with others. Those are the basics. And then,
yeah,
of course, if you there are a lot of people, therapists, these days online. If you need that, there are people. And I will say about the therapy community, there are good ones and bad ones.
this is true.
And 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 if you do go down that route and find yourself relating to somebody that is just not listening to you or understanding you, it's time to leave. Get somebody
Yeah,
else.
there you go. There you
Yeah.
go. Well, Pamela, we're going to wrap it up because I know we started later. So, just real quick, what kind of final words or advice or takeaway would you like to provide to those who will be watching this, who are watching it, who will be watching it, and just to the community in general with dealing with, coping during these times, dealing with maybe former trauma? What advice or tips would you provide? It's kind of like your last parting words.
I guess the parting word is underscoring again, really taking care of yourself in those various ways that we talked about, having
Yeah,
real patience and kindness with yourself,
yeah,
recognizing that wherever you are, in life, emotionally, and mentally, that the way forward is that way, is
yeah,
going that way, and that you can work through it. And if you need help, find that community that will support you and help you and listen to you and comfort you. Because again, we're not independent beings. We're just not wired that way. So
yeah,
yeah, so call on the people you can call on, to build
yeah.
whatever you need to build for yourself. I
I
guess those
love
are my
it. I love
brilliant last words.
it. Yes. Well, Pamela, thank you so much. much. And again, I appreciate your patience. I know we had some challenges in the beginning, but I definitely think this is important to talk about. And even though May Mental Health Awareness Month is ending, I definitely feel, and I've been saying it all along, we need to continue the conversation. The same way, you know, we talk about other healthy things, our diets, exercising, fruit smoothies, and all of that. Let's keep the conversation going about our mental health as well. So
Great.
thank you so much,
Y-
Pamela. I'm
You're
glad we
very
connected.
welcome. That's a great closing line, Lita. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I will be talking with you soon. Take care.
Very good. Take care. Bye.
Bye.